This video is going to talk about the short run versus the long run and how we would get the short run cost for the firm. In our two-factor production model, one thing we can note is that if the firm wants to adjust the quantities of these inputs, it's typically going to be easier for them to adjust labor than it is capital. And it depends on the exact nature of the capital good and the type of labor. But most types of, if you think about it, it's kind of generally or generically, labor a firm can adjust relatively quickly. For instance, a store could put up just a sign in the window, help wanted, or a sign at the counter, help wanted, inquire within. They could put an ad in the paper or on a website. And they could even, if they want, ask their employees to work overtime. If their employees work overtime, they would actually then be working more hours, and that would be a way of increasing the effective amount of labor that a firm would have. If you think of capital would be things like machines or factories, and it takes a lot longer to adjust capital than it does labor. If you're going to build a new store or a new factory, it's going to take months or maybe years to do something like that. We have a new Hobby Lobby and TJ Maxx that are being built here in Troy. They've been working on the site for months, and they're still not going to open until sometime in 2021. So it's the kind of thing that if you're going to adjust your capital, it's going to take longer. It might take months or years to adjust capital. Labor you could adjust in days or maybe weeks is typically the case. So there's an economically relevant period of time, like say over the next 12 months, when you say capital, you may not be able to adjust the size of your factory, you may not be able to adjust capital, but you could adjust labor. Would you be willing to, how could you adjust labor to try to produce more of a good or adjust the amount of the good that you produce in the short run? So in terms of our isocost diagram, what I've drawn here is a firm where they would be minimizing cost if they were going to produce a quantity of 20. And so here we've got the ISO cost for that. And I've drawn in some numbers here, just again, making these numbers up. Let's say that to produce the 20 units of the good in a cost minimizing fashion, that this firm would want to use 10 units of labor and 15 units of capital. In the last video on driving the cost curve, with that expansion path that we had, the expansion path had the amounts of capital and labor varying. So if the amounts of capital and labor are both varying, that must be the long run. I didn't say that in the last video, but that must be the long run once we think of the distinction between the short run and the long run. The short run is defined as a period of time in which at least some inputs are fixed. The long run is a period of time in which all inputs are considered variable. In our two-factor model, labor is going to be the variable input. Capital is going to be the fixed input in the short run, or the one that takes the more time to vary. So the expansion path that we considered, because capital was varying, was a long-run expansion path. If the firm in the short run wanted to adjust their output, in this case, given that they maybe were starting, they've optimized their capital stock to produce 20 units of output every period. Well, in the short run, capital's fixed. So here, if you draw a horizontal line here from the at 15, at the quantity of capital that the firm sort of are at, this is in effect, this has to be the firm's short run expansion path. Because if capital's fixed, then they can only adjust labor. So they can hire more labor if they want to increase output from 20 to 30 in the short run with their capital fixed at 15. The only thing the firm could do is hire more labor. If they wanted to reduce output from 20 to 10, the only thing they could do is let labor go. So that gives us then the short run cost minimizing quantities for the firm. And I've already pre-drawn these in, but for labor, If they wanted to increase output from 20 to 30, they'd have to increase labor from 10 to 20. And if they wanted to reduce labor from output from 20 to 10, they could reduce labor from 10 to 6. This actually gives us the information, just as with the expansion path, it gave us the information for the cost tables of a firm. This path here with capital fixed in the short run gives us the information we need to construct the short run cost tables for the firm. So we have fixed and variable costs, and just to be able to calculate this, I have to actually specify a price for capital and a price for labor. So the price of capital is 10 and the wage for labor is 20. And then what we can do is come over here and write out the quantities. And the total fixed cost, well, capital is the fixed input. Capital is fixed at 15 units in this case. The price per unit of capital is 10. So that's going to be a fixed cost of $150. And because it's fixed, it doesn't vary. And then the total variable cost, well, again, labor is our variable input. So the labor cost would be our variable input. We have 6 units of labor. We're producing 10 units of output. So that would be a variable cost of 120. And 10 units of labor at 20, so that's a variable cost of 200. And then again, we just made up numbers here, but 200 at 20 at to produce 30 units of output, so that would be a variable cost of $400. And then you could add to this this table if you want. The total cost would simply be the sum of these two numbers for each, and then you can figure out the average variable cost, the average fixed cost, and the average total cost from there. But this is, again, you would have seen a table like this in a principles book showing like the short run cost tables for a firm. Again, we see that this comes from cost minimization, but it's a slightly different cost minimization exercise than what we saw for in the long run with the expansion path. One thing to note is that the firm has their capital stock fixed at 15 here. And so the short run expansion path is in effect horizontal at 15. It is possible that the firm could have had their capital stock fixed at a different level. They might have 10, they might have 20, something other than 15. If the firm had, say, a smaller capital stock, say they had optimized, they had minimized costs of producing a quantity of 10 here, they'd have a smaller capital stock, but then in the short run, they would still have there'd be a period of time with a smaller capital stock in which that capital stock is fixed, so you'd have a different horizontal short run expansion path. So when we talk about the cost tables for the firm, it's really, that would be the firm's cost tables for different fixed levels of capital. Now, there's one thing here that if we think about the way we define the long run, and this is a bit of a more advanced point, but I'll bring it up anyway. The long run is really a planning horizon. A firm is never truly in the long run because at any moment in time, they're going to have a factory, for instance, of a given size. So when they have a factory of a given size, that factory is fixed. We might think, of a period of time like 2 years into the future, 5 years into the future, enough time that if a firm wanted to adjust their factory size, for instance, or if they're a retailer, adjust the number of stores they have or the size of their store, they would have plenty of time to make that adjustment. But 2 years from now, which, maybe 2 years from now, October of 2022, which from our standpoint here in October of 2020 is the long run. When we get to October 2022, the firm's going to have a fixed capital stock. They will be in a short run then. It'd be maybe a different short run because maybe they would have adjusted their capital stock. Some of it, we're always in the short run. We never truly get to the long run. And that's because the long run is this planning horizon. It's in this model, they say, like, if you can adjust, if you can optimize on all margins, how would you, if you were able to make every adjustment you could, how would you, what would your pattern of fully adjusted actions be? And so, we never really truly get to the long run. But one thing we definitely can see is that in the long run, there's going to be more adjustment than there would be in the short run. Because in the short run, the only thing the firm can do is adjust labor. They can't adjust their fixed input. In the long run, when they get to adjust everything, then they will have a different pattern of optimization. So more adjustment occurs in the long run. So one thing to note is that we could figure out short run average cost here. If we were to think about the long run average cost of producing these different units, different quantities of output versus the short run average cost, the long run average cost always has to be lower than the short run average cost. It couldn't actually be higher. It may be the same. For instance, we know that for the given input prices here, you'd be minimizing cost of producing 20 units of output at 10 and 15. So whatever this short run average cost here is, it would also be the long run average cost, because that's the case where the firms are minimized. But whatever these average costs would work out here, I guess that would be $27 per unit, if I add that up properly there. We have $27 per unit here at an output of 10, and that'd be our short run cost. The long run average cost of producing 10 units of output has to be lower than that. It can't be higher, because you wouldn't adjust capital. In the long run, you're free to adjust capital. You can produce 10 units of output with more or less capital. You want to produce with less, but you wouldn't make that adjustment unless it's going to lower the cost. So costs in the long run always have to be lower than costs happen to be in the short run. So it's a type of adjustment. You're going to have the opportunity to adjust in the long run. Costs will end up being lower in the long run than in the short run. Our near-term adjustments can never be, will never be as full and complete as they will be in the long run, right? As when we get to adjust more different things. So this is the short run, and where we would be getting the short run cost tables, so the short run cost curves of the firm fund.